I'll be honest, this is like my fourth or fifth attempt at making this video. I'd planned to upload it a week ago, but after I'd finished my audio recordings and screen captures, as I was stitching everything together in the video editor, I decided that I hated the tone and tempo of my narration. So I'm doing everything all over again, and hoping to make the video shorter. I mention this because I think it's human nature to second guess yourself. If my narration was so bad that I needed to redo it, was I certain that this tool I've been working on was even worth sharing? What if it's too complicated or too niche? What if I'm focusing on the wrong aspects of development? What if there's a tool that already does what my tool does, but better? Sometimes second guessing ourselves is a useful habit. My narration really was bad, and my original recording time was over 30 minutes. But sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith and hope that what you've been working on will click with other people. So, I'm taking the leap. Hi everybody, my name is JC, and I'd like to share with you all the Coding Thunder RPG framework. Designed to work with Unity and the Ink scripting language, it emphasizes story-driven game flow as well as game systems built on flexible logic as data. The framework is still in early development, so many planned features still haven't been implemented, but my hope is that what has been developed is useful to those of you watching the video today. The purpose of today's video is to help people learn to use the framework themselves by showing how I can control a simple Unity scene to tell a story by using it. Hopefully this video gives you a quick and dirty idea of how the framework works, and whether or not it's something you, yourself, would want to use. Like many of you, I am still just a learner myself, so feel free to leave suggestions in the comments or make contributions to the framework's GitHub repo, since the project is open source. With that out of the way, let's get started. To me, there are three core pillars of role-playing games: narrative, choice, and stats. Today, we're going to go over the first two and save the third one for when I have more systems fleshed out. To that end, we are going to be building a scene that wouldn't be out of place in an RPG with dating sim elements. Think Persona or Shin Megami Tensei. The easiest way to get started with the framework is to go to the repo and either clone or download it. I'll be including the link to the repo in the video description. Once it's downloaded, open it with File Explorer. It should look like this. The source folder contains the framework itself. You should be able to drag its contents into your own Unity project and start using it, but I encourage you to start by using an example as a base template. In today's video, I'm going to be working on the dating sim example. In order to run one of the examples, however, you'll need to do one extra step. Go to the top level folder for the repo and go to Source, Coding Thunder RPG Framework. Select all the files in there and copy them. Go back to the top level folder and navigate down to Examples, your chosen example, in my case, the dating sim example, Packages, com.codingthunder.rpg framework. Paste the files you copied earlier into this folder. When you're done, it should look like what I have on my screen. Alternatively, you can use a symlink instead, which is what I do. But you should only do that if you know what you're doing and want to help develop the framework. Now, go back up to the dating sim example folder. If you want, you can copy the whole folder out and move it to a different place on your computer. In fact, if you end up using it as a template for your own project, I'd suggest doing just that. For now though, open the Unity Hub and add the dating sim example folder as a project and open it. Once the project is open, you should find the editor has opened to the main menu scene. It should look something like what you see on screen. The first thing you want to do is hit the play button at the top. Assuming you followed all of the earlier steps correctly, the player should build and open the main menu. Hit New Game. The game should transition to a classroom setting, and you should be able to move the character around with WASD. The reason we did this is because it shows that the project is, in fact, set up correctly. If for whatever reason it fails to build, either you messed up or I did. If you can't figure out why it's broken, please leave a comment below the video and I'll try to help you figure it out. Now, what you guys see probably won't match what I have on screen. What you see will either match what I have at the end of this video or something from later videos. The point is that it runs. Now, I'm going to walk you through how the example is structured and how I can control it to create cutscenes. Notice how in my version there was an error when I tried to leave the classroom. That's because the game is expecting a cutscene that doesn't exist, so let's make one. Let's start by hitting the play button again to stop the game. In the Assets folder, go to Scenes, Dating Sim Scenes, and open the Classroom scene. Look familiar? Here you can see the same crappy artwork as you did while playing the game. You've got the main character at the bottom right. Over here, you've got the pink-haired love interest. This is a dating sim after all. And look, there happens to be an empty desk near the back, right in front of the attractive love interest, so that the main character can gaze pensively out the window at the scenery. In the hierarchy, you should notice two objects of import. The first is the Game Runner canvas, which I just call the Game Runner. Between the Game Runner and the other components attached to it, that's where a lot of the magic happens, but you can ignore it for now. The second object, and the object of importance to us, is the Exit object. If you click on the Exit object near the top of the hierarchy view and scroll down through its components, you'll find one that's called Ink Trigger. And there at the very bottom of the component is a field called Ink Not with a value of classroom.exit. One of my core design philosophies is using the best tools for the job. To me, the best tool for writing video game stories right now is the scripting language called Ink. If you've used Twine or RenPy, it should be very familiar to you. The difference between Ink and those other tools is that it is platform agnostic. Technically, you can run Ink with any C# program, not just with Unity. However, the wonderful developers over at Inkle were kind enough to write a Unity integration package, which this project includes. They also created a program specifically for writing Ink stories called Inky. If you haven't already, I strongly encourage you to download the program, link in the description. While you can technically write the story in any word processor, Inky is custom built for the task. Once you have Inky downloaded, run it. At the top left, select File, Open. Navigate to the Dating Sim example folder. Open Assets, Dating Sim Story. In that directory, open datingsim.ink. This is where we are building our story. This is where the magic happens. If you don't see a file browser on the left, click the three bars at the top left. Now, there's a fair bit going on with these files. And if you poke around, what you find might seem a little overwhelming, especially if you're watching this video a while after it comes out. So, for now, ignore almost everything. All of that other crap will come later. Click on classroom.ink. Really quickly, I feel it's pertinent to explain how Ink works. Ink is a story scripting language and engine with its own internal state. It tracks where you are in the story, what choices you've made, and its own set of internal variables. The primary way it organizes story flow is through knots and stitches. While it's not a one-to-one comparison, you can think of knots as being full chapters in a novel and stitches being individual scenes in those chapters. Unlike a novel, scene flow in Ink isn't necessarily linear, so you transition between knots and stitches using an arrow symbol. For the purposes of the Coding Thunder RPG framework, knots have a one-to-one relationship between either scenes, such as Classroom, or systems, such as Timekeeper, while stitches can either represent full cutscenes or asynchronous game logic that can be triggered from within the game. Ink also supports special knots called tunnels, as well as their own implementation of functions. Tunnels are represented by having a divert arrow on both sides of its name, and while they are very useful, I'll refrain from explaining them in depth in this video. To learn more about how Ink Flow works, I strongly encourage you to check out its documentation. For now though, let's discuss how we are using Ink in the framework. If you're following along in the repo and go to line 29, you're going to see a big block of text. You can either delete those lines and follow along with the video, or you can just watch the video to see how I built the cutscene and what it does. First, we're going to start with the bare basics, a couple lines of dialogue and a single action. Okay, now let's go run that. Hitting play, and it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Well, it's saying in the error box that we aren't finding the stitch we're looking for, but I could have sworn. That's what it is. See, Ink, like most programming languages, is case sensitive. In my Ink file, I called the stitch exit with a lowercase e, but in my Ink trigger inside of Unity, I called it exit with an uppercase e. In this context, Ink seems to default to snake case for knot and stitch names. For knots, I'm making sure they match whatever they represent inside of Unity. That's not negotiable. But for stitches, I'm defaulting to following the Ink convention. Any breaks in that convention are because I'm stupid. So I'm going to go back to the exit object, find its Ink trigger, and change the Ink Not field to use lowercase instead. In the final version of the file, this capitalization error will already be fixed. Okay, let's run the game again from the classroom scene, and this time it should, booyah! we officially have a working cutscene. So what exactly did we do? We created 3 lines of dialogue. Whatever is on the left side of the colon is the speaker, and whatever is on the right side of the colon is what the speaker says. Then we used what was called a command, CMD for short. Commands are a core element of this framework, and they are how we tell the game to do pretty much anything from our Inc files, excluding standard narration and dialogue. If we want a character to move, if we want an object to appear, if we want to load a prefab, move to a scene, or save the game as part of the story flow or a cutscene, we do that through commands. I tried my best to make commands easy to follow, but the thing to understand is that they put the writer in direct control of the game using the easiest syntax I could come up with. In the video description, I'm going to leave a link to a list of all the current commands with brief explanations of what they do. In making commands, I had to strike a balance between simplicity and flexibility. The two concepts are usually difficult to cram together, but I'm pretty happy with what I came up with. Commands are composed of a series of keyword arguments separated by colons. Why colons? Because parsing plaintext is a pain in the ass, and C# doesn't use colons very often. Eventually, I'll add an escape character. Screw it, I'll be right back. Okay, there's an escape character now. If you use double colons, it'll interpret that as a single colon, not a separator character. Each pair of arguments is split by an equal sign. Left side is the argument's name, which is case sensitive. Right side is the value. To know what type a command's argument is, check the list mentioned earlier. Note that for numbers, you can perform most arithmetic operations using C# syntax, and that for booleans, you can perform comparisons, also using C# syntax. Yes, double equal signs will work, assuming I coded it correctly 5 seconds ago. This matters because, as you'll see in the command syntax, we can either provide literal values for the framework to use, or we can provide lookup values using slightly modified C# syntax, and we'll see that it works. You can also call some functions, though I was having issues with static classes earlier, so that feature may not work as expected. My goal with creating commands was to make them as flexible and powerful as possible. That does mean, however, that there are myriad opportunities for the developer, or worse, the player, to break the game. There aren't many guardrails in the framework right now, so it is imperative that you, as a developer, practice discipline, as well as preventing players from providing non-alphanumeric characters as input anywhere you might be using commands. The first argument here is move. That is the name of the command. With a few exceptions, each command can have its own set of arguments, but I try to be consistent between each one. In this case, target is the object we want to move. This will be in the docs, but for the move command, the target needs to be a game object that has a movement 2D component on it. If it doesn't, it'll throw an error. We do have a way to move objects without the movement 2D component, but we'll have to cover that another time because I'm lazy. Haha. dir, dir, is the direction in degrees we want the object to move, where 0 is up, 90 is right, 180 is down, and 270 is, you guessed it, left. Note that this is different from Unity's standard system, but I feel like it's more intuitive for those of us who grew up with analog clocks. Anyway, after that, we have speed, which equates to units per second. In writing this command, I had to decide whether I would explicitly declare how long it would take to move its desired distance, or if I would explicitly declare how fast it would move in that direction until it reached the desired distance. Because I couldn't have both, I went with the latter, if only because it allows us to consistently use the same speeds throughout the game instead of having everything move all wonky based on how long it was supposed to take. Finally, we have dist, which is distance in Unity's base units. Not coincidentally, one tile map tile is one Unity unit in length, so by setting dist to 2, we're saying we want the character to move up by 2 tiles. Now, the keen-eyed viewer will notice that there's some weird syntax in the target assignment. That has to do with another part of the framework that I won't get into right now, but the simple explanation is that it's telling the framework to look in the active Unity scene and grab the game object with the name player character. And that's it. We were able to manipulate the game from our story script. However, you'll notice that the video isn't over. Why? Because I don't like half-assing things. Let's expand this cutscene a little more, and I'll walk you through a couple more basic commands as well as how we're handling basic choices in the game. Before we move to that, however, if you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing. In addition, while this video is focused on using a game development tool, I am also a published fantasy novelist. So, I'm sponsoring myself by suggesting you check out my book, Benrigesh, Volume 1 of the Cocoon Chronicles. Benrigesh is a high-flying action-adventure fantasy set in a unique noir world with magic and guns and monsters. Oh my! One way I've described it is as a light novel on steroids. The volume is 3 individual novels packed into one, with 30 pages of manga art spread throughout its length. Author DJ Butler describes Benrigesh as a rip-roaring adventure that oozes with style and stars characters for whom you can't help but cheer. It's violent and loud, but it's also punctuated by quiet and heartfelt character moments. Moments which ground the reader in his deeply imaginative world, and moments which make you feel each broken bone and each drop of blood spilt. I don't know why I gave him a southern accent. Anyway, I also feel I should mention, since we're about to write a scene for a romance sim, if you really enjoy heartwarming love stories, I've gotten very positive responses to the love story subplot in Benrigesh. Just saying. Anyway, enough shilling from me, let's get on with our example. We're not going to go super far today, but let's add a bit more meat on these bones, shall we? You'll notice that we have a first day stitch inside our classroom knot. For now, let's ignore that. We can worry about that in the next video. For this video, we're just going to pick up where we left off, trying to exit the classroom. Inside the classroom Unity scene, I added a few extra objects for us to use in the scene. They are player row, next to desk, player at desk, teacher spot, and teacher. Keep these in mind as we go over the cutscene we're about to write. Now, let's go back to the ink script. For this scene, we want to have a simple bit of dialogue and blocking. It isn't much, but it should show just a bit of what you can do. Picking up where we left off, the next thing we want to do is add the teacher to the scene. To do that, we'll add the spawn command. Note that within the framework, spawning and despawning just sets objects to active and inactive right now, though I may add more logic over time. If you want to instead instantiate a prefab, you can use the load prefab command. At present, there is no command for destroying game objects. Now that that's done, let's go check and make sure that the teacher is actually spawning in. He is? Awesome! Okay, let's add a little more. Let's actually move the teacher into the classroom, and because our character won't want the teacher to run into him, he'll move upward too. Now, there are a few ways to have multiple things happen at once. We're going to start with the simplest, and in a later video, we'll start diving into some of the more complex ways that you can have multiple things happen at once. First, let's write our character's movement. If you were to go back and hit play, you would see that the player character moves first, and then the teacher moves second. Now, we're going to write #auto after both lines. For those of you who haven't used ink before, tags are an additional form of markup that ink gives to your game that allows you to provide information about the line without it being in the line. In this case, we're providing the auto tag. If the RPG framework sees the auto tag, it knows to go to the next line without waiting for the current one to finish. So, by putting an auto tag next to both lines, we're telling the game, make these characters move, then let's start our next line. Let's write that line so you can see what I mean. We'll name our teacher Mr. Pickles, and here's what he's going to say. Now, if we go back and hit play, we'll see that the two characters both move at the same time, and Mr. Pickles begins speaking. Awesome! Now, a fair word of warning. Using auto to make things happen simultaneously has its drawbacks. If you want things to happen simultaneously but then wait for them all to finish, this won't work. Additionally, you need to be wary of race conditions. If a line after your auto action is dependent on it, then if you get your timing off, you could accidentally cause silliness. As I said earlier, we'll go over other ways to make things happen simultaneously in later videos. Okay, let's add some commands for the player to return to his desk, shall we? For this, we're going to use the move to command instead of the move command. The difference between the two is that move expects a direction, speed, and distance. Move to expects a speed and destination. For its destination, move to accepts a vector 2. Now, we can manually write out a destination like parenthesis 5.5, comma 3, close parenthesis. And yes, you need those parentheses, though I'm probably going to change that. However, rather than do that, we can look up the position of an existing object. So let's do just that. We'll type $scene.playerRow.transform.position. Remember those empty objects I put down earlier? I'm using them in order to easily look up my desired position. Now, writing out the $scene.player.character blah 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 each time gets real old real fast. There isn't a way to check syntax until it's running, so there are a lot of opportunities to fat finger important info. So let's go to the top of the stitch and make a temp variable called playerref and set it to $scene.playerCharacter in quotation marks. This creates a variable in ink that we can use to substitute inside our commands. For good measure, we'll also create a temp variable called pos, P-O-S, and we'll set that to transform.position, again in quotation marks. Now let's go back to our most recent command and swap those out. To be sure they work, we can run the scene in Unity, but I'm just going to assume they work for now and continue writing my scene. Now, once our player character is in position, let's move our teacher to the head of the class. We'll set it to auto so that there's no interruption for the player character, then tell the player to move to next to desk. And because the player is moving so slow, we won't need to worry about race conditions. Now, how do we get the player in the empty desk? There are many ways to approach this, but I decided that simplest is best for now. Notice in our scene we had empty desk, player character, and player at desk. We're going to despawn the first two and spawn the last one. We don't need to use auto because it should all occur in a single frame. Again, we can run this with play if we want to see that it works, but again, I'm going to keep writing. For this last section, we're going to focus on features that come with Ink itself. If you haven't had the chance, I strongly encourage you to look over Ink's documentation after this video. We're going to add some narration, some dialogue, and some choices, so let's do that. Okay, so some important elements to be aware of. I use the variable love interest 1 name and love interest 1 affection. Those variables are first defined in the initialization.ink file. By default, the framework will use the most recent non-command line as the prompt for choices. However, if you want to manually set it, you can do so by just putting prompt before the colon. I'm not going to go in depth into Ink's choice system here, but the RPG framework currently supports up to 6 choices, which in my experience should be more than enough for dialogue options. You can see here how easy it is to change the game's state based on player choices, and then change the flow of the story based on the state of the game. For example, if the player gives a less than satisfying answer, the love interest won't ask to hang out after school. Once the stitch is done, you'll need to type the arrow and end, which returns flow control to the framework itself. Okay, so with all of that work done, let's actually see the fruits of our labors. Let's go up a little, up and down.
Hey, wait, don't go out, it's unsafe. Wild Pope. I've just been informed by my lawyer that I'm not allowed to make that reference. Get your stinky butt back inside the classroom. I can't believe you plan to just walk out of class like that. Get back in your seat.
Slow walking, slow walking, slow walking.
Good. Now for today's lesson, we're going to learn about common tropes in literature, starting with...
As Mr. Pickles gets going with his lecture, the girl behind you taps you on the shoulder and begins to whisper so that only you can hear. Were you really about to just walk out? Okay, let's be a bad boy. You know it. That's crazy. You're crazy. She says that, but her eyes gleam with excitement. You might be crazy, but maybe it's good to be a little crazy.
Are you paying attention back there? This will be on the final exam.
Let's chat again after school, okay? And there we go. It worked. Woohoo! Normally, the player would have control over their character except for one problem. We despawned the character. I'm going to leave off here and let you, the viewer, try to think of how you could get the player out of the chair. Also, what happens if we go to the exit again? In later videos, I'll discuss concerns around scene initialization and story flow management. I'll also discuss how we can create more complex behaviors in Ink using command sequences and command blocks. Like I said, I'm still just a learner, and honestly, I'm still not certain if this framework will actually be useful for anyone. Because of that, and because it's still early in development, I'm definitely looking for feedback. Either leave a comment below or consider contributing to the open source repository. For now though, I hope this gives you an idea of how you can use the framework to tell a story in your RPG and control your game from the narrative. I've got some fun plans in store for not only the framework, but also my own games and books. If you think this tool is useful in any way, please consider liking and subscribing, or go check out my Patreon, where I'll be posting future videos ahead of other platforms. Writing the framework and making these videos both take a good amount of work, so any support you can offer would be deeply appreciated. Anyway, I think that's it for me. Until next time, JC out. P.S. Buy my book.